Damaged Defenders by Sherza. Chapter 26. Remi and Natasha. Remi had had a long, fruitful day. It took a certain degree of skill to blow debris into manageable chunks without making even more of a mess or hurting people with a blast, even for him. The demolition crew he'd been working with all day had near started worshipping him, which made him worry about their level of sanity. They'd even offered him a full-time job with their crew for a truly obscene amount of money if you weren't Tony Stark or Warren Worthington. He declined the offer gently. As much fun as blowing things up was, he didn't exactly want to do it for a living. He hadn't told the slightly unhinged, explosion-loving demolition crew that, of course. He just told them he already had a job. It was even the truth. Above and beyond the X-Men gig, he taught some of the kids French. Remi stretched as he made his way to the tower. He was supposed to be making his way to the edge of the destroyed zone and the parking garage where the van they'd driven down in was at, but Remi had other plans. He'd told Hank, Kurt, and Warren not to expect him. They hadn't asked why. Hank had actually told him to let them know what had happened. Even Warren, who called Logan an uncouth hooligan, among other epithets, admitted that something serious had to have happened to drive Logan into taking not just Rogue, but John as well out of the mansion. Apparently, permanently, no less. Jarvis, where's Logan and the kids? Remi asked as he walked into the tower and headed for the elevator. They are on the common gathering level, Jarvis told him. Let me off there, would you? Remi told him. Of course, Mr. LeBeau, Jarvis said. The elevator doors snapped shut, and it started moving the moment Remi was inside. Remi could get used to never having to wait for an elevator or for a bunch of random strangers to pile in with him and get off before he did. Remi had never told anyone about his empathy. He was relatively sure, in point of fact, that not even Charles had sussed that bit of information out. It was of limited use, anyway, as he could only pick up on emotions of people in about a 20-foot radius or so. His ability to influence emotion was even more limited. Anyone he tried it on had to be unaware that's what he was up to, have no mental defenses, and not be in the grips of a blindingly intense emotion. Mostly, all the empathy did was cause him trouble. It made things like elevator rides and subways a hassle. Though Remi was willing to admit it made locating people trapped in the rubble a lot easier when he'd been on that job the day of the attack and the day after. Logan and the kids were hanging out by the massive flat-screen TV, watching some movie with a lot of action and explosions. Remi snorted in amusement and vaulted over the back of the couch they were on and slid down into the spot between John and the arm of the couch. One of these times, someone is going to smack the crap out of you for doing that, John said amiably. Remi snorted. No, he said, never going to happen. He let the movie run for a little bit. He didn't bother trying to figure out the plot as he'd walked in partway through the movie. He just enjoyed the violence and explosions. Eventually, when the action died down for a bit, he glanced over at Logan. So, why's the change of address? He asked. Jane, Logan said. Remi snorted again at the one-word response. The worst part of it was that in this case, one word pretty much explained the situation. Well, mostly. So what'd she say to Rogue this time? He asked. It wasn't a bad guess, even if it didn't really explain John joining them. Wasn't Rogue, Logan said. Remi blinked in surprise. He'd been aware, like the rest of the X-Men, that John tended to hang out with Logan. He'd had no idea the relationship had evolved to the point that Logan considered John to be under his protection. However, he didn't think any of the others had known either. Well, that explains it, Remi said. What exactly had happened still had to be answered, but Remi could guess. It wasn't all that hard to guess, given it was Jean involved. She was fairly predictable about certain things. She got her pants in the water for me using my fire when I'm by the lake with Logan, John told him. Started screaming at me. It didn't end well. Well, that much Remi had been able to figure out by himself. Yeah, noticed that, he said, sounding amused. Ain't the first time she stepped in it. How many times have you heard her give me shit because I'm an ignorant, thieving Cajun? He asked. John laughed. Way too many times, he admitted. I kind of want to be there when she finally figures out how wrong she is. Makes two of us, Rogue said, speaking up for the first time. Because I had Remi pegged after 5 minutes. Jean's known him for a year and still thinks he can't speak in the first person most of the time. Remi, just a dumb occasion boy, Remi said, his native Cajun accent abruptly in full effect. All 4 of them laughed. Remi had definitely had a rather distinctive accent as a kid, but he got into a lot of trouble to learn to speak with a less distinctive accent. The Cajun was good for hoodwinking people into thinking he was an idiot, but useless for any other purpose, including blending into a crowd. He still had a faint French lilt to certain sounds, but it was faint and only on certain sounds, so hardly all that distinctive. They fell quiet after that and went back to watching the movie. About the time the movie finished, the elevator opened and disgorged Tony, Pepper, Natasha, Clint, and Bruce. A few moments later, the doors opened a second time, and Thor, Steve, Phil, and Betty stepped out. A third trip produced Darcy, Eric, Jane, and Loki. Remi waved at them as they started wandering around. Tony flopped down in the chair next to where Remi was sitting on the couch. Hanging out rather than going back, Remi? Yes. Yeah, wandered the wardrobe Logan to bring the kids down here, Remi admitted. Besides, your pad is better equipped. He waved a hand, indicating the entire floor of stuff in general, and the flat screen in particular. Tony sat up. Oh, hey, thanks for the reminder, he said. We really need to set up a culture thing. Now, this is how things work 101, and this is our entertainment 101. We have 2 aliens and a guy who's been out of the loop for 70 years to get caught up on everything. Pepper smiled as she perched on the arm of Tony's chair. Otherwise known as an excuse to subject everyone to your tasty movies, she teased. Hey, they're good movies, Tony objected with a grin. Just because they're not chick flicks. He ended up having to dodge not only Pepper's gentle backhand to his shoulder, but multiple cushion projectiles aimed his way by the rest of the women, including Natasha. Dude, you did not just go there, Clint said, looking very wide-eyed. Remi didn't blame him. Didn't know you had a death wish, Tony, he said, agreeing completely with Clint. Calling the sorts of movies women liked chick flicks, even if it was true, was dangerous, and that was just with normal women. When Natasha Romanoff was in the room, it was outright suicidal. Tony grinned and checked. They can't kill me, he pointed out with an impish grin, completely ignoring the stink eye Pepper was giving him. I pay the bills. They'd only hurt me a little. Clint abruptly sat forward. I just realized. This means they haven't seen, he waved a hint, any of the good stuff. This is a tragedy. I agree with Stark. We have to fix this. That got amused laughter from most of the people in the room. But how do we do it? Bruce said. By year? By genre? By status as a classic? There's a million ways. First things first, we need to figure out which ones to skip, no matter how good they are, because they're going to cause problems for someone in the group, Betty said quietly. Tony grimaced, but nodded. Points. I can think of a few off the top of my head that we need to steer clear of. Remi could too. Like The Abyss, for one. Which was too bad, because it was an awesome movie. Unfortunately, the whole drowning in freezing water thing and Bud sacrificing himself to save the day, especially since it wasn't a permanent sacrifice, was just asking for a flashback with Rogers. Remi joined into the increasingly spirited debate over how to handle the movie situation and which movies needed to be eliminated from the must-be-watched list with a relish. They all had their favorites, movies they considered vital to be watched. Predictably, with such a diverse group, practically every movie named had several advocates as well as several detractors. He did, though, head over to Thor, Loki, and Steve after a while. All 3 of them were looking confused, exasperated, and amused by turns, and Remi knew it had to be irritating to not have anything to contribute or even really know what the heck everyone was on about. So he wandered over and sat down by them, giving them a brief, vague rundown of the plots of various movies so they'd at least have an idea of what was going on. Or He tried to. Turned out movies had not come up in Loki's brain download except that they were a form of entertainment. Thor didn't even know that much. Steve, for all intents and purposes, was nearly as clueless since he'd actually been born before so-called talkies had been invented. Not by all that much, Remi didn't think. He wasn't sure how old Steve was, but still. So we had to explain the concept of movies to Thor and Loki, and things like CGI to all of them, before they could really understand what was going on. Eventually, the movie debate wound down. No movies were watched that night, since they needed to get a list of no movies ironed out before they got started. Natasha waited for Stark to get to his feet and headed for the kitchen area, clearly intending to get something to eat or drink, and followed him. She made sure she made enough noise that he could hear her coming. Stalking silently and scaring the crap out of people was fine when it was for training or in the field, but doing it with her teammates was a bad idea. Stark, she said, swinging up onto a bar stool in front of the island that served as both prep and eating area in the kitchen proper. We need to talk. Tony gave her a wary look as he pulled a bottle out of the refrigerator. Oh? I deliberately blew the op with you, Natasha told him. Fury forced it. Phil, Clint, and I knew nothing good would come of his interest in you, so I deliberately blew it. Tony cocked an eyebrow at her. Uh-huh. Natasha snorted. Stark, I've been a spy for a long, long time. I've made a career out of getting in and out of places unnoticed, of getting close to targets to find their weak spots in their security and their mentalities. Now, do you think someone with that sort of track record would break characters so badly when asked to box with someone? That made Tony blink a bit. Okay, points, he finally admitted. So you tried to make me suspicious without actually saying something and getting Fury on your ass? Natasha nodded. And I deliberately threw your assessment to hell and gone, she said. I had a good idea of what Fury was looking for, hoping to see. If he'd gotten it, he would have tried to force you into the fold. I know you could have fought him off, but you really didn't need that sort of stress right then. Tony regarded her for a long moment. You weren't wrong, he pointed out. Natasha gave him a flat stare. Stark, you may be a little volatile, yes, but you're a genius. Volatility generally comes with that territory. You play well enough with others, or none of us would be here. And you for fuck sure aren't any sort of narcissist, never mind a textbook one. She tapped the table with a finger. You're a snarky bastard, but that's hardly something to kick you out of the Ninja Initiative for. Especially given Clint was on the initiative list from the beginning. Clint was near as much a sarcastic bastard as Tony was, and she dreaded the day Clint relaxed enough around the rest of the team to let that side of him out. Your other faults are no worse than any of the rest of ours. Tony just stared at her again for a long moment before his expression suddenly cleared, as if he'd figured out what was going on. You're apologizing, he finally realized. Something like that? I don't like having stuff like that on the docket. It muddies the waters, Natasha said. And if I'd been given a choice on how to handle giving you that syringe, I'd have done something else there. But Fury was watching. And Fury is a bastard, Tony said. Fair enough. Clean slate. He offered a hand. Clean slate, Natasha agreed.